Wendigo was a gaunt to the point of emancipation, its skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently come back from the grave. What lips it had that were tattered and bloody, its body was unclean and suffering, giving off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. Basil Johnson, Ojibwe teacher and scholar, Ontario, Canada. Hey guys, welcome back to Forest Trails and Scary Tales. So again, haven't been able to find my headphones to give you guys some more stories, but instead we're going to continue with monsters. So, one of the creatures that has always scared me, probably the only thing that truly scares me, is the Wendigo, the monster. I will never go up to the Northwoods for this very reason. I believe the monster to be very real, and in Indian culture, it is seen as a great evil. Tribes still do ceremonies to hoard them off. So, let's get down to this terrifying monster. Of course, a lot of people have heard of the Wendigo. There's been movies, comic books, and of course, if you know Pet Sematary, you know the Wendigo's the main villain of that story. So, let's get down to business. What was this great evil, probably the greatest evil in Indian legends, and why does it still strike fear into a lot of Native Americans today? Let's get going with the Wendigo on Forest Trails and Scary Tales. In the Northwoods of Minnesota, the forests of the Great Lake region and the central regions of Canada is said to live a being called a Wendigo. Also, it could be spelled Wendigo. The creature may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human. It has a spirit who was a possessed man, being made and then become monstrous. It is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, greed, and taboos against such behaviors. Known by several names: Wendigo, Widigo, Wicketo, and Weetigo. Each of them roughly translate to the evil spirit that devours mankind. The creature has long been known to the Ojibwe, the Eastern Cree, the West Main, the Saltoks, the Swampy Cree, the Naskapi, and the Innu peoples. Other tribes like the Crow and the Blackfoot have also described them in the past. They have described them as giants, many times larger than human beings, although descriptions can somewhat vary. Common to all these cultures is the view that the Wendigo is a cannibalistic, supernatural being that is strongly associated with winter, the north, coldness, famine, and starvation. The Alakaling legends describe the creature as a giant with a heart of ice. Sometimes it is thought to be entirely made of ice. Its body is skeletal, deformed, and missing lips and toes. The Ojibwa describe it. It was a large creature, as tall as a tree, with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was strange, hiss, its footprints full of blood, and it ate up any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory, and they were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckiness individual became a Wendigo himself, hunting down those who had once loved and feasting upon their flesh. According to the legends, a Wendigo is created whenever a human resorts to cannibalism to survive. In the past, this occurred more often when Indians and settlers found themselves stranded in the bitter snows and ice of the Northwoods. A lot of racist things have gone around saying that most Indians were cannibalism. No, most Indians believe that cannibalism was a great taboo, and that is where the Wendigo supposedly came from. Sometimes they'd be stranded for days. Any survivors might have helped to cannibalize the dead in order to survive. Other versions of the legend cite the humans who displayed extreme greed, gluttony, and excessive might also be possessed by a Wendigo. Thus, the myth served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Native American versions of the creature spoke of a gigantic spirit, over 15 feet tall, that had once been human, but had been transformed into a creature by the use of magic. Though all of the descriptions of the creature vary slightly, the Wendigo is generally said to have glowing eyes, long yellow fangs, terrible claws, overly long tongues. Sometimes they are described as having sallow yellowish skin, and other times depicted to be covered with hair. The creature is said to have a number of skills and powers, including stealth. It is a near-perfect hunter, knows and uses every inch of its territory, and can control the weather through the use of dark magic. They are also portrayed as gluttonous, representing starvation. A Wendigo's hunger is never, ever quenched. It is always hungry, always hunting. Wendigos are said to be cursed to wander the land eternally, seeking to fulfill their appetite for human flesh. And if there is nothing left to eat, it starves to death. And of course, there is always something left to eat, of course. So, what does this mean? How could it mean this? Do Wendigos truly exist? I guess we'll never know. Actually, we do know. There's been many sites, many writings, many that truly believe in this terrifying monster. So, let's go through the evidence, shall we? Here's what Indian people say in their legends. It's a name to dispute modern medical term, the Wendigo psychosis, which is considered by some psychiatrists to be a syndrome that creates an intense craving for human flesh and fear of becoming a cannibal. OCD and fear of becoming a cannibal. Of course, great fears come from demons, do they not? That's what Indian people say. That fear is of a demon, and the demon tries to possess thee. Do not let them. It is said to occur within people living around the Great Lakes of Canada and the United States. This sickness usually develops in the winter in individuals who are isolated by heavy snow for long periods. The symptoms are poor appetite, nausea, and vomiting. The individual develops a delusion of being transformed into a Wendigo monster. People who have Wendigo sickness increasingly see others around them as being edible, and at the same time, they have an exaggeration fear of becoming cannibals. This has been said around many people who live in those areas, which prove around the fact of the Wendigo being real. The most common response when a person showed signs of Wendigo sickness was a curing attempt by traditional native healers. In case of the past, and if these attempts failed, and if the possessed person began to either threaten those around them or to act violently or antisocial, they were executed. There has been reports of these sickness dating back hundreds of years. A 1661 Jesuit relations document said, "What caused us great concern was the intelligence that met us upon entering the lake, namely, that the men deputed by our conductor for the purpose of the summoning of the nations to the North Sea, and assigning them jobs where they were to await our coming, had met their death the previous winter in a strange manner. Those poor men, according to the report given to us, were seized with a sickness unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They are afflicted with being lunatics, but have a combination of all the specific of disease, which affects their imagination and causes them more to hunger for human flesh. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and upon men like werewolves, and then devour them without being able to appease or gulp their appetite, either seeking fresh prey, and the more greedy by the more they eat. This attacked our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among the simple people for checking such acts of murder, they were slain in order to stay the course of their madness. Another document occurred in 1878 when a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta named Swift Runner suffered one of the worst cases known. Swift Runner was a trader with the Hudson Bay Company who was married and the father of 6 children. In 1875, he served as a guide to the Northwest Mounted Police. During the winter of 1878 through 79, Swift Runner and his family were starving, along with numerous other Cree families. His eldest son was the first to die of starvation at some point. Swift Runner succumbed to Wendigo sickness. Through emergency food supplies were available at Hudson Bay Company, 25 miles away. He did not attempt to travel there. Rather, he killed the remaining members of his family and consumed them. He eventually confessed and was executed by authorities at Fort Saskatchewan. A Wendigo allegedly made a number of appearances near a town called Rosia in northern Minnesota from the late 1800s to the 1920s. Each time that it was reported, an unexpected death followed, and finally, it was seen no more. Another well-known case of Wendigo sickness was that of Jack Fiddler, an OG Cree chief and medicine man known for his powers at defeating Wendigos. Fiddler claimed to have defeated 14 Wendigos during his lifetime. Some of these creatures were said to have been sent by the enemy shamans, and others were members of his own band who had been taken with the sickness and the desire for human flesh. In the latter case, Fiddler was usually asked by family members to kill a very sick loved one before they turned Wendigo. Fiddler's own brother, Peter Flett, was killed after turning Wendigo when the food ran out of the trading posts. Hudson Bay Company traders, the Cree, and missionaries were well aware of the Wendigo legend, though they often explained it as mental illness. Regardless, several incidents of people turning Wendigo and eating human flesh are documented in the records of the company. In 1907, Fiddler and his brother Joseph were arrested by the Canadian authorities for murder. Jack committed suicide, but Joseph was tried and sentenced to life in prison. He ultimately was granted a pardon but died 3 days later in jail before receiving the news of his pardon. Among the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Assaboni, and their ceremonial dances is sometimes performed during times of famine to reform the seriousness of the Wendigo taboo. The frequency of Wendigo sickness cases decreased sharply in the 20th century as the Native Americans came into greater and greater contact with Western ideologies. Some say they were given more food, so this was able to stop the sickness of resorting to cannibalism. However, Wendigo creature sightings are still reported, especially in northern Ontario, near the Cave of the Wendigo, and around the town of Kenora, where it has allegedly been spotted by traders, trackers, and trappers for decades. There are many who still believe the Wendigo roams around the woods and the prairies of northern Minnesota and Canada. Kenora, Ontario, Canada, has been given the title of Wendigo Capital of the World by many. Sightings of the creature in this area have continued well into the new millennium. So, what does this mean? I will just say this. I will personally probably never go up to those areas. But if you do, make sure to say your prayers. Be careful. And if you ever feel the sickness coming, get out. Get out quick. For the greatest evil lives in those north woods. Always be kind to each other. Be good to your elders. Listen to your parents. And like I said before, be kind to each other.